So I've decided to take the plunge. After seeing my friends get into the property game, it's time for me to put my money where my mouth is and invest in the market. But where do I even begin? What makes a good investment? What should I steer clear of? Well, luckily for me, I am going to chat to an absolute gun of an investor and tag along on one of his property inspections so he can show me the ropes. Eddie Deline has done the hard yards to build a property empire. Working multiple jobs since the age of 14, he now has 28 properties and counting in his portfolio and runs his own property consultancy business. I'm betting he's got the info I need to find the best investment. All right, so Eddie, you've got quite a few properties. Where do you even start? What is the first thing a new property investor should do?
Well, I think the first thing is really trying to identify what you want to achieve long term. For me, property investment was a way to basically replace my income. The second thing is definitely identify which property market as an investment you're going to be aiming for.
Okay, so once I've figured out what my goal is, what are the main things that I should be looking at when I'm researching properties?
Some of the main things that I first started off researching was really the property rental yield. I want to buy a property that is essentially a really good bargain. Try to pick up a property that is under what it's worth, and some people call that under market value or even below the bank valuation. Having a really good healthy rental return and a really good cash flow so that the property can overall look after itself. It pays for your expenses, your council rates, your water rates, all that other kind of stuff.
You mentioned rental yield. What is rental yield and why is that important?
So a rental yield is essentially a percentage value of what return you're getting back from buying an investment property. So if you're buying a property for, let's say, $500,000 and it rents out for $500 a week, that's roughly a 5.2% rental yield.
So Eddie, what is your game plan at an inspection?
So for me, three main things I really want to check out when I'm inspecting a property. One of the things is cracks. So I always look at cracks in the ceiling and in the cornices. Number two is really looking for moisture, especially around wet areas like kitchens, bathrooms, all that kind of stuff. Number three is things like water hammer. So if you can hear like a big banging sound, they call it water hammer essentially.
Yeah. And we don't want the water hammer because that suggests we're gonna have to fix things later, is that right?
Definitely, it shows the signs there might be something wrong underneath the house with like the plumbing and the pipes and all that kind of stuff. So always check out for that.
So Eddie, I've heard a lot about this first home buyer's grant. Is it worth me living in the place to get that grant, or should I just go straight to renting it out?
Personally, if it was me, I would go straight to rent it out. In that time you live in the property, you're not getting a rental income at all. Further to that, like the tax deductions, if you were to buy that property first as an investment property, you actually get the tax deductions on things like council rates, water rates, management fees, insurance, all that kind of stuff adds up.
Well, Eddie, thank you so much for letting me tag along today. That has been really helpful. Before I let you go, what is your best tip for a first-time property investor?
The best tip I'd say would be to really try to educate yourself. And if you don't have the time, then get someone to help you that actually has done it before themselves and they can point you in the right direction.
Thanks so much, Eddie. Well, Eddie has given me a lot to think about and I'm excited to get started. I just have to figure out what my end goal is, and remember, it's all about that rental yield and capital growth. Now I just have to figure out how I'm going to pay for everything. So I've had a look around at a few different investment properties and I've narrowed it down to a couple of contenders, but I still need to sort out my finances. So I've invited a financial planner to come over and hopefully help me sort out my funds. And maybe even let me get away with the odd smashed Avo or two. Davina Paletto has been in the financial services game for over 15 years. She's also a landlord herself and has been buying and selling property since she was 18. Well, Davina, thank you so much for meeting with me. I've been looking at investment properties and whether I'm even ready to do that. How do I know if I'm financially ready to invest in property?
The key things to consider when looking at an investment property is, firstly, do you have a stable income? There's a common misconception that people need a really high income for an investment property. That's not often the case. You really need to adopt an investment mindset. So purchasing an investment property is typically a little bit different to purchasing something that you would want to live in.
To know and understand my numbers, how do I then figure out how much I can spend?
Easiest and quickest way to understand how much you can spend is using what lenders typically call the LVR ratio. So LVR just stands for loan to value ratio. And the LVR is the amount you're borrowing represented as a percentage of the value of your property. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a $200,000 deposit and you want to buy a $1 million property. Your mortgage is going to be $800,000, so your LVR is 80%. So the higher your deposit, the lower your LVR, and the more attractive you become to the banks.
Is there a buffer I should have? Do you have like a percentage that you'd recommend financially for a buffer there?
Most financial consultants will tell you that 2 to 4 months of repayments plus 2 to 4 months of your typical income is a good starting point as a buffer.
Is there one biggest mistake that you see first-time property investors make?
Probably the biggest one that I see is overcommitting. The banks will typically give you an amount that you can borrow.
Yep.
I would always suggest not borrowing to your maximum capacity. Leave yourself a little bit of a window for unforeseen circumstances.
Thanks so much, Davina. That was really helpful. Thank you. Well, it looks like I'm on the right track money-wise. I've got a secure job, tick. I can pay the mortgage, tick. Now I just need to find the right loan, and that is where my new mortgage broker comes in. Sam Qureshi is an experienced mortgage advisor with Smartline, as well as a qualified financial advisor. He's passionate about property investment, and as a fellow Sam, I'm sure he's the guy to point me in the right direction about my financing. Sam, what is the first thing that property investors should think about when it comes to financing?
So when you think about financing, you should, as a first and foremost, think about who's going to be a good financing partner with you for the long term, and of course, someone who's going to offer you a reasonable priced product for you to be able to use. So first and foremost, you should think about a loan that you want to be able to live with over time, not just on the day of the settlement.
Sam, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see people make when they're investing in property?
A lot of people don't realise that having a credit card, even if you're not using it, will go against the amount that you can borrow. The bank will take the limit as a commitment and often apply at least 3.8% of that limit as a commitment on a monthly basis.
If you had to boil everything down into your best tip that you can give to property investors, what would it be?
You should have the benefit of foresight in hindsight. You know, the ability for you to stretch yourself a bit, buy a bit better, bigger piece of land in a better suburb, and what you will find is that in years to come when you look back, you know that it's made a big difference in terms of your wealth creation over time.
That's good to keep in mind. Thanks, Sam. This has been very helpful.
Pleasure.
Money matters can be really confusing, but if I just remember to keep my LVR as low as possible, then I can get this investment working for me. Well, after a lot of searching and sorting out my money, I have finally found the best investment property for me, and I'm ready for the next step, getting tenants. But do I hand everything off to a property manager, or should I go it alone as a private landlord? I'm off to find out. Jason Hoff is a senior property manager from Moreton with extensive experience in property management. He's all about making sure landlords get the best out of their investment. What is a property manager and what do they do?
So basically our aim is to maximise the owner's investment. It is one of, if not the biggest asset that someone will own. We do a multitude of tasks, including rental arrears, ingoing, outgoing, routine inspections, insurance claims, and repairs, maintenance, and so on.
What would you say are the biggest advantages to having a property manager?
I think the biggest advantage of having a property manager is you have someone trained in their negotiation who's out there to try and find the best deal. And also when something does go wrong, often people will be trained in how to handle those situations. So I think it's always very important to do your research on someone that you are thinking of going to, speak with them and make sure that you're on the same level.
Jason, what if I choose not to go with a property manager? What are some other options for me?
Your other options would be obviously self-management, and another option that some people do is they'll manage it themselves. However, when the property comes up for lease, they'll ask an agent to look to lease it out, and then once it's leased, they take it back over. I think the biggest problem is, look, when things are going great, tenants paying the rent on time and looking after property, it's all fantastic. But as soon as something happens that's outside of the norm, that's where it gets really tricky. And what you are really doing is needing that experience and expertise.
A property manager seems like the best option for a busy investor like me, but I am still curious about being a landlord and doing it yourself. and I found someone who has done just that. Kerry is a former real estate agent with a ton of property managing experience. She has the insight from both using a property manager and being a private landlord, and is currently self-managing her investment property in the inner west of Sydney. Okay, so run me through advertising your property. Do you put it online? Where do you put it? How does that all work?
From previous experience, I knew that the best place to put the rental property was on realestate.com.au. There's really no other way you would do it at this point. If you look through the website, you can find the little links to advertise yourself. It gives you a nice little option to sign up for a 4-week run of your ad, which was great. Then you just go through, add the description in. It does try and help you along the way, and photos. So it is really good to have a couple of good photos at least. It is just a matter really of following the prompts. It goes live online, which is great.
What advice would you give to any new investors thinking about whether they become their own landlord or get a property manager?
I guess the most important thing is to really objectively assess whether you're really the person to do this, whether you have the right people skills to be the person engaging with the applicants, whether you have the time, because technically you can get a call at any time 24/7, and you do need to take that call. You need to be able to ensure that the tenants don't have any reason to be unhappy and not pay the rent.
Are there advantages to doing it yourself?
Well, I guess the advantage of doing it yourself is you've got hands-on control of your property, so you'll do the inspections, so you will see firsthand that the property's being looked after. Obviously, there's a financial difference. It's obviously a plus if you're not paying someone else, but I would generally suggest to most people that if you're spending a couple of $100,000 on a property, then to spend, say, 5% of the weekly rent to have it professionally managed is definitely worth consideration.
Well, there you go. 2 different options for maintaining your investment. There's definitely pros and cons to both of them, but the most important thing to remember is that whichever one you choose, your investment is in the best hands possible. Now I'm off to find some tenants.